Ja, guten Abend, herzlich willkommen im Depot. Ich freue mich, Sie heute zur ersten Ausgabe einer neuen Diskussions- und Gesprächsreihe begrüßen zu dürfen. Klaus Speidel hat das Ganze koordiniert in Zusammenarbeit auch mit der Universität für angewandte Kunst. Ich freue mich, heute Oliver Ressler bei uns begrüßen zu dürfen und ich bitte dich jetzt, lieber Klaus, das Wort zu übernehmen und den Abend zu moderieren. Herzlichen Dank.
Dankeschön. Ja, erstmal vielen Dank auch an das Depot, dass ihr dieses Abenteuer angenommen habt dieses Seminar hier fortzusetzen. Eine Bemerkung zur Sprache. Wir finden es zwar immer seltsam, wenn zwei deutschsprachige Menschen zusammen Englisch sprechen, aber in dem Seminar wird Englisch gesprochen, das an der Angewandten stattfindet. And there's some students who only speak English, am I right? And so we will have our talk in English, and of course you can ask questions in German. We hope that's okay. Because it's actually a part of a seminar. The seminar is called New Narratives. Since the beginning I had thought maybe I should call it How to Make Art When the World is Burning. Now it's called New Narratives, Making Art in Times of Crisis. And it really grew out of a certain, frustration with a lot of things that do happen in art school, and also maybe myself and what I was doing in the past, where we treat very sophisticated topics. I'm a philosopher by training, curate exhibitions and write art criticism, but I never really addressed these contemporary conditions heads on, and I felt it was time to do so. Oliver Ressler was way earlier to understand that and has been doing work on the present day and the burning world in a very literal and also figurative sense since 2 decades or 3 decades, yes. But so I wanted to make a seminar where we really address this question: how do you make art when the world is burning? How do you get out of this feeling of maybe being overwhelmed that a lot of students share, of being paralyzed by the current situation? What are strategies to address the present moment as an artist, with art, not becoming maybe a pure activist, even though some artistic strategies have consisted in leaving art completely and doing activism, or in Fluxus becoming a taxi driver, or different things, but making the bet that you can continue to make art and be, yes, dealing with the contemporary world rather than perhaps making intelligent gestures only for people that are already initiated, referencing minimalism or conceptual art in intelligent ways, instead of engaging with the present. So you can maybe do these different things, and we will talk about it. And since the beginning, I wanted to look at historical positions. Of course, Goya, who spoke about the Napoleonic Wars with his disasters of war in the 19th century, Käthe Kollwitz or Georges Grosz, who worked against the Nazi regime with art. So they were artists who really said, okay, there's an issue with the contemporary world. I'm not going to just do portraits of bourgeoisie and make a living with that, but I'll really also try. Maybe I'll still do portraits of the bourgeoisie like Goya, but I'll also talk about the problem of my time. And in his time, one of the problems he saw was, of course, Napoleonic Wars, also in Spain, and all the brutalities and inhumane actions that both sides committed in this war. So really looking at these historical examples, but also looking at people who try to do something similar today, to invite them. And I asked Depot if they were willing to have the conversations here so more people could join than just the people who are studying at the Angewandte and do this seminar together. We started really with trying to identify crises together, ask people about things that mattered in the seminar. We clustered them according to 4 themes, basically environmental issues linked to the environment, the climate crisis or climate emergency, as some people prefer to call it. You call it also the climate breakdown. being one of these political crises, including authoritarianisms, lack of support systems, breaking down of support systems, social crises, and then something which kind of grew out of the discussion, crises linked to technologies as well. So, and of course, a lot of people are now speaking of a polycrisis where these crises mutually inform each other's, right? So by using AI, of course, we have ethical issues, we have copyright issues, but we also reinforce the costs on the environment, the load on the environment, and so on and so forth. So talking about these connections. And Oliver Ressler was honestly the first person that immediately came to mind. I think he's probably the representative from Austria who internationally is also the most visible addressing these topics, has been doing it for a very long time, and has also received attention, of course, in Austria. And maybe the most important show that you did is one that you would start with. So I thought probably a lot of you know him, but maybe not everybody, and it's also nice to, in the beginning, have a short reminder of what the practice actually is. And so I invited Oliver to share a bit of his work before we dive into the conversation, and hopefully also you get a chance to ask your questions, and also questions that you have when you're an artist who's still figuring out where to go and what to do and how to deal with the present. So thank you again.
Yeah. So thanks, Klaus, for the invitation to participate in this cycle of talks and conversations. Yeah, as you mentioned, I started working on, as I described it, the climate breakdown like 30 years ago. And in the last year, I had the possibility to present several of these works I have been working on over the years together in an exhibition in the Belvedere 21. And we decided on that I give a kind of a 10-minute overview. There were more than 50 works in the exhibition, so there's no possibility not even to mention all these works in the show, but I decided to choose 3 of them just to also show you different perspectives and different methodologies I use in my artistic practice. So when you entered the exhibition space, and the entire exhibition, I should mention, was focusing on my artistic work in relation to climate and the climate justice movement. So I have a huge focus in my work on social movements. And since 2008, I work on climate justice movements. So the first work, when you entered this huge glass space in the Belvedere 21, is a video that was presented there as a large screen titled "Not Thinking, Swarming." I did several works focusing on forms of mass civil disobedience in the context of the climate justice movements. And this is the only one I did which does not only focus on activities by climate activists, but it's one of the only documents that exists which shows also the planning of such acts of mass civil disobedience, because usually the acts of mass civil disobedience, the blockade of a street or the blockade of an open pit coal mine or of a train track or of a fossil-fired power plant, these are quite visible, and they are also made to some extent to be there, to have something that can also be shot. And so activists are also usually find that this is being recorded, but it's also, I mean, also police is doing images. So everyone participating in these events knows that he, she will be recorded, will be shot. But this is very different when we focus on something that makes possible these events, and these are usually being discussed and planned in the framework of assemblies where different delegates from different groups meet together. And I was planning to do a project like this over years. I was always rejected just because it's quite risky for people participating in it due to the possibility to become criminalized. But finally, I found the organizers of a huge street blockade in Madrid, and they gave me the permission to document the central assembly in September 2019. And as no one wanted to be recognizable in the film, I had to apply different techniques to anonymize the people. And on the one hand, it's the pixelation. You can see here, I pixelated not only faces, but entire images, which of course has also, there's an entire history of pixelated images from pointillism to pop art and many things influenced by these styles. The second one takes the outlines of the people sitting in the assembly, usually groups of 3 or 4 people, sometimes also 10 or 12 people. I think there were 15 or 16 people altogether in this assembly. And I merge, I delete the faces and the bodies of the speaking people, and I fill the outlines of these people with this act of mass civil disobedience, with the blockade of the street that happens a few days afterwards. So you have 2 levels of time overlapping in one image in this work, and it's in slow motion. The material from the blockade, and it's a quite complex thing. So when we just walk around the exhibition, so we can only walk here following the images, you see a multiplicity of different formats, from photographic works, flags, objects, installations, films, and huge posters, mannequins. So I would like to talk about this project a bit, which also points to a quite central method of how I carry out artwork. This is a piece titled Reclaiming Abundance. It was commissioned by the Kunsthaus Graz in 2020, and it focuses on 6 areas in Styria, in this province in the south of Austria, which all cause a lot of carbon emissions and are somehow related to fossil capital. And I did drone images of each of these infrastructures and tried to rebuild them how I imagine these things could look like 30 years afterwards. So you see here always on the legend on the left a small image of how these things, the airport, the largest slaughterhouse in Styria, like a highway, a coal-fired power plant, things like this, how these infrastructures could be rebuilt. And I was thinking in a way like, how could society look like in the best way when we try to do things like in the right direction, right? I mean, trying to find a way of how to democratically organize a low carbon society. And even in such a case, carbon emissions would still rise in 2050, right? People being forced to the fact that certain regions around the globe would be uninhabitable. So we would have a huge amount of additionally refugees, sometimes called climate refugees. So for example, the The airport, which you see here on the very left-hand side, is being rebuilt as a self-organized space where refugees would set it up on their own. No chance to go really that much into detail. Another work, so we have one work focusing on like utopian visions, or what we as society could imagine as alternative ways of living together. Then we have the resistance, and another aspect that's quite central for my artistic practice is a kind of an analysis and critique of the current state. And this work, it's a 2-channel video installation, so these are 2 projections presented in a black cube, was recorded in Svalbard. Svalbard, sometimes also referred to as Spitsbergen, is this archipelago between the mainland of Norway and the North Pole. And it's the fastest heating area on the globe. So while here, globally, in the last year, we, as humanity, exceeded 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. Here in Austria, we have 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels, so slightly above the global average. But in Spitsbergen, in Svalbard, you have like 7 to 8 degrees above pre-industrial levels. So you going there, you can really see more or less an ecosystem collapsing in front of your eyes. And the amazing thing is that this is a territory where, except for 2,000 people who live in a single city, no one lives except for polar bears, but no humans are usually living there, even though in the past there were more activities. But this is more or less, you see there the accumulated results of the actions of humanity and of the effects of business as usual of fossil capital. So I think, I just give you the chance to go through the rest of the exhibitions, but these are the 3 works I wanted to refer to a bit, to give those people who have not seen my work or have not heard about my work, give a bit of an idea how this work looks and functions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Very much on point. I'm very happy this is a conversation and not a portfolio show, because very often portfolio shows for me are a bit frustrating, because the artist, and you have done it much better, I must say, so you could have done a portfolio show too, but the artist says, and then I did this, and then I was invited to participate in this, and then I did that, and then this one invited me and I did this. And you're showing this to students, and they can say, oh, how cool, such a cool artist, he was invited in such fancy places, but how is it going to teach you yourself to think about art and making art? And so one thing, and I wanted to ask this later, but I think it fits really with your presentation. One thing I wanted to discuss, and that we're also looking at in the seminar, is what are artistic strategies that you're actually using in your work, and there's a variety of them. And I had written down, thinking about it, a few, and you mentioned 2 more, so that's perfect. So, and it's trying to figure out in what cases you use which strategy, and if you mix them and things like that. So one, of course, is documentation, right? You make struggles visible that are otherwise invisible. They can be, for instance, in Pacto in Ecuador. Well, most people from here don't see it. Puglia is an example with the Porsche testing site that they wanted to extend, and where they tried to announce it in August when no one is there, and we also don't know what Porsche is doing there. Or in the case of Madrid, you go into these activist groups and look at it. So that's one thing, this documenting and making visible, which in a certain sense, for me, relates to what people have said art is doing. Even Kandinsky wanted to make things visible, and of course his strategy was very different, right? Spiritual things, and in your case it's more. Then there is, but also, and that's already maybe more unexpected, there's poetry. And you didn't mention it, but it was also in the show Canopy Cut Down to Sand, was in the exhibition, where it's really images of the sand by the beach, and there's quite poetic statements that accompany them, which very often we wouldn't think of activist art in relation to poetry, I suppose. At least it's not the most obvious association. Then there's slogans. So for now I'm looking at the ones that I had found before, but for instance, Arctic permafrost is less permanent than its name suggests, with an image of melting ice, or property will cost us the earth. For this, yeah. And then what you brought in is also projection, so like imagining a future, right? A worse or better future, which also people have thought artists do that, right? Fondation Lafayette in Paris has a slogan, venir voir venir, come to see what comes, and they're an art foundation, and of course they are saying, look, if you want to see the future, you need to look at art. So in your case, it's in a very literal sense in this work that you showed with future projections, and Gloria Benedict is also here, will be the next guest, and I know of your work that you're also looking into more positive futures, what could be a good outcome rather than just the scary, right? So not only the doomer narrative, but also what can we achieve if we're able to turn things around, because of course the doom is less, I don't know why, but I could ask you why. And lastly, analysis, right? What you called analysis and critique with the work on Spitsbergen, which we would more associate maybe with research traditionally and with science, and that you put into art. How do you navigate the choice of topic and the choice of way you deal with it? Is it, yeah, how do they come, or how does it come to you, or how do you reflect? I don't know if it's very rational.
Thanks for summarizing all these different techniques, which I'm maybe not always even aware that they all exist. I mean, I'm definitely not an artist who does the same thing all over the time. So maybe the opposite of, I don't know, like Onkawara or so, who does the same painting with different date every day in the morning after having his coffee. So it's usually a mixture, a combination of different things that lead towards a new project. So first is that there is probably two different kinds of projects in general. There's projects I'm invited to do and projects I want to do from my own intention. So I always wanted to go to Svalbard, so there was no invitation in that case, even though I found invitations and I found institutions to pay me for doing this. But that was my initiative. But then, for example, the work I'm doing always a few different projects, but one of the things I'm doing at the moment is I'm working on an underground passage in Trenčín in Slovakia. In the next year, there's the European Cultural Capital 2026. I'm one of the people invited, even though this is not yet public, but this is also recorded. I forgot. Now it's public. But anyway, I would have never, as you can imagine, I would have never worked on an underground in Trenčín if there wouldn't have been this invitation, right? So if you look at my webpage, which lists more or less pretty much everything I did in the past 30 years, you will probably see like half of the projects, I don't know if it's half, but probably half of the projects are based on invitations, and half of the projects I just want to do them because I'm so interested for some reason. I'm really interested in this climate thing. I have a huge interest in social movements, not only in relation to climate, but I worked on worker-controlled factories, which is also kind of a movement strategy, even though it's not so obvious, maybe, because it's still a factory. I worked on like Occupy and Square movements, on this so-called anti-globalization or anti-capitalist or alter-globalization movement, different names for one movement that emerged after the blockades of the WTO in Seattle in 1999. I worked on the Bolivarian process in Venezuela before everything was collapsing, and a few other things. So, I also worked on, and I'm interested in racism and migration and these things. So, and the interesting thing is that these interests, they sometimes merge also into one project. So some projects, for example, I also decide working on because I also see how these different strands, these different parts of my research lead together. So for example, I did a project together with the Australian artist Sunny Beck in 2017. We started earlier on that, but it was published in 2017 on the Pacific island of Nauru. I would have never worked on that if I wouldn't have read about it, and the history of colonialism, racism, climate breakdown, and even shadow banks, on which I also worked on another project, lead together in this tiny remote space. And so this can also lead towards how I decide why to focus on a project.
When I'm just hearing you speak about that island and why it's so interesting, is each project specifically about the place, or is it more that you look for places where something shows itself? And yeah, in this case, you know, these different things coming together.
I do also in the videos. I do quite different works. There's some of these works that require a lot of research to go to the place, to get a budget together. You try to find a concept or whatever. But I also have work, and in the past years I did really many of them. When this climate justice movement was more active, I was just in a multiplicity of different signal groups, telegram groups, mailing lists, whatever. And so I was just, all this information was coming into my news feed, and I was just almost curating or selecting according to my needs. And then I chose, I want to be in a blockade of Europe's second largest coal harbor, for example, or it would be fantastic to go in an open pit coal mine. I've never been there, so there's a good chance in the Czech Republic the next weekend. So I take a ticket, a train ticket, and go there. So these are things that almost need no preparation. I have my camera, I have my audio equipment, I put it in a backpack, I buy a train ticket, I go there. Sometimes I can use the material I record, sometimes I cannot use it or don't use it. And very often a project develops on the basis of something where I do not know 100% what will be there, right?
Mm-hmm. So, so you're kind of saying that you're not like curating these things only because you think, okay, this is going to be a place where these different things come together, or because this place is so specific. But in this case, I mean, if I were to retro engineer, which I will try to do the process, it's a bit that in this context, at least, you had a kind of scouting process where you're like, okay, I'm in a place where I get informed when something happens, and then nearly like a journalist or a kind of investigative journalist or someone like Weggy, who would listen to police radio and would then go where something happened and take a picture. You go with your camera, with your interest. So that would be one way into a work, right? And okay, but then some places like this place in Spitzbergen is more like, this is such a singular place because of the peak in change, and you're interested in it. But now talking about the strategies again, so what I call strategies, for lack of a better term, how do you then decide, okay, this is more a poetic work, here I'm going to make more a kind of vision for the future work? Is that intuitive, or?
Yeah, I mean, the works are very different because, for example, you cannot go to Svalbard on your own. It's more or less impossible. So I found that the easiest and also the cheapest way was to more or less embed myself in a scientific research trip by climate scientists, and that's what I did. But it was still more than 10,000 euros just to be on the boat for 10 days, which is not even very long, like it's 1,000 euros per day. And so, of course, I need to raise funds to do this, and I think there was like a 2-year-long fundraising process for this project. The train ticket to the Czech Republic for 45 euros, I do not even think about it. I just buy the ticket and go there, right? And so in these cases, there's a lot of material that just develops due to the way how I manage to move with the crowd, right? And it's very important to have personal connections also while moving with the crowd, just because sometimes very quickly unpredictable things happen, always. So it's very often the case that like the movement goes and then they take a very quick turn to the left and do something in order to surprise the police, to break through a line in order to go a different path, and maybe in a direction the police did not plan before, something like this. I need to know this in advance in order to be in the right spot, and maybe also to shoot how they break out of the police that maybe encircles that. So it's very important to have people in these events telling you, now go over there and be quick with filming. Something like this is very valuable. And usually, you also mentioned it's like a journalist, right? That like a report. It's true that also the journalist might have a camera, or a photo camera, or a video camera. Still, I think the work is very, very different because first, I'm not employed. I don't need to deliver something the next day or even the same day, and there's no one who instructs me what I do with the material I record. So these are main differences. Journalists are also obliged to something they call neutrality, where I would hesitate to believe that it exists, but a lot of people believe it exists and would even defend it as a concept. It's kind of a bourgeois idea that there's this journalistic neutrality. So my work is always biased. I'm always on the position of the people in the blockades. When I'm in a demonstration, I don't bring in the perspective of the mayor or of the police, right? I don't care. And I have the liberty to combine the material with all kind of language or other material. You mentioned poetry, right? So several of the works I did, I I combined the material of the acts of mass civil disobedience with a quite poetic text, which I usually write in collaboration with Matthew Hyland, but which is also a very political text, but still with a very poetic language, I think, which is a very different language to the language a journalist would use, for example, right?
Yeah, very, very interesting points. Yeah, also how you distinguish it from journalistic work. So this idea of an embedded artist, I mean, it's not, I think it has existed for a long time, right? Artists who went and drew the, for instance, landscape and nature. Usually they took artists on excursions and so on, but you're also an embedded artist in a certain sense in these acts of civil disobedience, where it's way less formalized and way less structured, and then the relationship you need to the people that you're going to be accompanying.
Just to interrupt you shortly,
Yeah.
There's also embedded artists, for example, in the military. The Canadian military has, for example, embedded artists. So in the Gulf War, they took in the tank with them a painter, for example, who then was standing there and trying to do a landscape painting with the burning oil in the background or something like this, which is, I mean, so cynical, I would say, and I try to embed myself in the resistance movements. So, yeah, I would never go with the military, right? Yeah. Even though I would be interested to work on that, but not embedded with the military.
Right, right. You would probably find yourself on the other side.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's maybe, is there more questions on the question of strategy? If not, I would move to a different kind of question more. Okay. The question I wanted to start with is actually, could you walk us through a bit your biography? How did you decide to study art, and what happened then, and how did you end up becoming the artist that you're now?
Yeah, I was actually very young when I wanted to become an artist, and it was also very clear for me at a very young age, when I was still at school, that I wanted to work in a political manner. Even though I had no examples, I was always interested in politics. So I was reading like popular books on climate breakdown when I was 15 or 16, I think, which were very influential for me. I really learned that yeah, in what kind of world we are living, and these things at that time, when I was 16 or 15, they were also kind of invisible. I mean, nowadays you can feel it in the summer that this is not how it should be, right? And you see the world is burning all across the globe. Yeah, so I actually started painting and was very soon realized that it's not the right way of working for me to address political issues. And then it took a few years, I would say. I was quite slowly finding ways to express these things I was interested in, and did a lot of different things, like trial and error style. Yeah, I think when I was like 25, I had my first public presentations, which were, most of them were in public space. So I did kind of billboard interventions and huge poster campaigns and things like that. They were very successful. So very soon I made my way in the direct art world, even though those were really funded from the art world. And yeah, so they were launched in the mid-1990s, when here in Austria, the FPÖ, the far right-wing party, was growing, and they became stronger and stronger after each election, and the entire discourse moved towards the right, also of the Social Democrats and of the Conservative Party. There were institutions that were new at that time, not only in Austria, but also in other European states, like these detention centers for migrants. So I did a work in collaboration with the artist Martin Krenn on these detention centers, and we labeled them as a form of state racism. And yeah, I was also working on economy. I did an analysis of the annual reports of the 500 largest corporations published in the Global 500. And my work also had the title, The Global 500. And then luckily, a few weeks after that project was published for the first time, the uprising in Seattle took place in 1999. So for me, that was like a lucky coincidence, because what was missing for me when I worked on that was the resistance. And then the resistance really arrived here in the global north, and I could combine it and connect it in the coming works. And I knew it, I think, in the minute when I saw the footage. At that time, you saw this footage on Indie Media, an independent platform from the activists, that I wanted to do something. I only did not know what to do it and how to do it, but it was immediately clear for me I wanted to do art that connects to this movement, something that is also of value for the movement. I didn't want to do something where I kind of film something or take something and bring it into the art world.
What we would call extractivist, extractivist relationship to activism
Even
now.
though this also happens naturally when you work there, but it was also clear that I wanted to do something that can be brought back, and that also has a meaning and a function for the movements. And this is like today, because all my works are freely available for activists, for leftist unions, for social movements. They're being used for schooling, to prepare a younger generation for demonstrations or for blockades, for acts of mass civil disobedience. So all the works, they have another life independent from the nice museum life you saw in the back, and you still see in the back.
Yeah, there are two points to follow up, at least for me. One is this question of the different contexts that you're navigating, that I had been thinking about a little bit. So, and the second one is, you said this work was quite successful, and I taught a seminar last year, or it was more trying to figure things out with the students, was called How to Live and Succeed Like an Artist. And so suggesting that the idea of what success means, in many careers it's very clear, right? If you're a startup founder, whatever, you probably want to have a lot of users and then sell your startup for some money or become a big corporations or whatever. And when you're a banker, you know, you want to climb up in the career ladder. But in art, it seems, hopefully, that it's not just about making the next bigger museum and then being in the biennial and the documenta and being famous, but maybe there's some other things that matter as well. And yeah, so so what is success for you in an artwork? And
so at that time in the 1990s, when I was 25, 26 years old and just graduated, there are different components of success, of course, as you know, but what was for me the most important is that with the first work I carried out, I was part of a media discourse. So Martin and I, we were invited to be part of a live radio show, for example. We had texts in, I don't remember, in Standard, Falter, I think even one in the Taz, in a German leftist weekly. So for me, that was really amazing. Of course, I hoped that it would work like this, but I did not believe it will work like this. Right?
What was the campaign?
The first project we did together was called In English, that had a German title. The English title is The New Right, Materials for Its Dismantling. So if you scroll down on my webpage, you have to scroll down till to the very end. You will find something where every graphic designer will tell you this is exactly the opposite of anything you should do in public space. It doesn't contain a single image. It contains a lot of text, and it is in black and white. Still, because this was probably the complete opposite of anything you would expect from a large-scale billboard, this reached a lot of visibility because it was really different than everything else you see usually in public space. And this used quite complicated text from new right intellectuals, and these texts were crossed out with a line, and the same line that crossed out the texts of the new right underlined leftist texts that dealt with the racism and the xenophobia and the sexism and the nationalism of these new right assholes.
Okay, so thank you. So indicator of success in this case was like media picking up on your work, but different layers you also mentioned before I had you tell me what the work was.
I also won 3 art prizes in the first year, so that also, I mean, financially I was then more or less independent for 2 years, just because, yeah, and it was connected with 2 solo exhibitions in the following year. So for me, this was also kind of the start of my validation, but it also came with money and with possibilities to connect my work and to show my work in art institutions.
Mm-hmm. And the art institutions are still central to your work, even though, right? Yeah, I would say, yeah. And so these different contexts, just to put it simply, what do they do for you? So it's the kind of activist context and the art context.
I mean,
it's more that the one is funding the other, right?
No, it's definitely more. Even for the funding aspect, is a really central one. I mean, yeah, having an exhibition like this, or I have a comparable, even though smaller, but also in a museum with a lot of audience, at the Museum Töngeli in Basel in Switzerland at the moment. So I have 14,000 people seeing my work every month, and the exhibition stays there for 6 months. So this is really audience. So I just see it on Instagram, how people connect to it, how they tag me, emails where people have questions, media write about it. So if you manage to present your work in major art institution, you really get audience. And if you do a work like mine that's connected to resistance, that's connected to social movements, there's not really newspapers or TV educating us about civil disobedience. This is just, I mean, you might see an image from time to time, but then only how ugly it is and how poor the drivers that they could not arrive in time in their workplaces and things like that. But I mean, I really do something different. I try to present platforms where people, from which people are able to speak from. And yeah, and these exhibitions, they also create platforms and make this accessible then also to a larger audience.
Okay, so that's actually quite positive, because in my bad moments I always think that the art world is this ghetto where no one goes, but actually it can be a place to have an audience for issues. Yes, please. A question from the audience. One remark that is always made at the depot that I'll make now. It's recorded. If you don't want to be your voice to be recorded, don't use the microphone. But if yes, please do.
As you mentioned, you always think about the impact. Or my question to you would be, do you think the activists go to your shows, or the people go to your shows and become activists?
ideally both. But I mean, of course, there's the hope that when you present work on activism, that people not only consume this as information, but that it has an aspect of motivating people, of mobilizing people, of activating people. So I really hope that it's not something passive, but something that is inviting and something that, that might lead to action elsewhere. But there's also activists visiting my exhibitions. There's always audience that comes more often than once. This is the audience that's really interested in the work. An exhibition, like I do exhibitions, you cannot consume the entire exhibition within a day. Technically, yes. Practically, not. The exhibition in the Belvedere 21, there were, I think, 11 or 12 time-paced works, and altogether, they were like 6 or 7 hours. But I also have I even have one work which is 8 hours long. It was even presented a lot, like 24 times. It's a 16-channel video installation titled Alternative Economics, Alternative Societies. So you see, I did a lot of works that usually works that where everyone tells you this is not what you can do, this is not what anyone will look at, this is not how the art world works, you have to do it differently. If I hear something like this, I hear very well, and then I start thinking on, well, if everyone says it like this, then I have to try to do exactly the opposite, just to test it out, if it makes sense, right, as an experiment.
Thank you.
At least once.
Fantastic. Yeah, that was a very interesting point. So one marker of success would also be that it might motivate people to not just consume the work passively, but to think differently about activism. For one, if you're not an activist yourself, maybe change a bit or introduce another narrative than the narrative of dominant media, where it's like finally they get condemned to pay for annoying us on the ring and so on, this kind of stuff, where we wanted to drive to work. And then also perhaps motivating more people.
And another aspect of success just comes to my mind. This is nothing I experienced in the 1990s, but I experienced it in the last few years a few times. I think doing this work I am doing, success is also when activists approach you and invite you to document their work or to participate in their struggles and to help amplifying their struggles. So you mentioned shortly the piece I did in Puglia on the Porsche test circle. This is actually a commissioned work that's now on display in the Berkeley Art Museum. It has not yet been presented somewhere else. There will be a festival premiere at the end of the month in Italy. But this was a piece where I was invited from artists, from activists in the movements who knew my work and wanted their struggle to be amplified through an artistic work. And this is, of course, amazing. I mean, it usually...
It's a sign of trust as well.
Yeah, it's a sign of trust. It does not mean there's money involved, but you have all the connections, and it makes your research also much easier if there's people who at least have a proposal of what they think you could do, and very often it's a very good starting point. There's another project I did in Venice, which was also based on activists from the Venice climate camp and the climate justice movement in Italy, where they approached me and wanted me to do a film on their activities.
Thank you. Are there other questions right now? Yes, please, front row.
So at first I want to say thank you for your work. I really appreciate it. because you talked a lot about the difference between, in your opinion, between journalism and being an artist. I would disagree with that a little bit, because I think the line you drew is, for me, in my opinion, is it's more like fluid. And what interests me is the question, you portray people or groups, activists, or their work. How would you differ being an activist and being an artist? Or do you see yourself as both, or more activist or more artist? Or
I was hesitating for a really very long time to describe myself as an activist, so I was always insisting that I'm an artist and filmmaker. And then I had so funny conversation in different cities with different people, but all had the same argument. They told me, if you're doing the films in the way as you're doing them, you are an activist, because there's different tasks in activism. And it's not only like sitting in the blockade or gluing yourself to the street or whatever, but like cooking in the climate camp is also as part as activism, and therefore you filming this thing and doing something that is also then of use for the movements is also activist parts. And I found this so convincing that at that point, when I heard this argument, I think for the 5th time, I gave it up to reject that I'm an activist. But still, I'm not an activist who organizes demonstrations or blockades. Even though I participate, sometimes I see this then more as research. Even when I participate without camera, I see it more as research.
Yeah, Gloria, you have a question, or do I interpret your...
Yeah, I think I'm unconvinced about this definition of activism, that if you, I don't know, yeah, okay. For me the difference is, in journalism and scientists, I have this conversation with them all the time. They always say the journalists say they are neutral, or they try to be neutral. Scientists say they are objective. But of course, as a scientist, if you decide to work on climate for your whole life, you decided this is the important topic, therefore you are no longer objective, right? I mean, we all make our choices on the topics we find important to work on, and therefore objectivity doesn't exist. So the difference we defined between art and activism is, what you mentioned earlier, if you're actually, as an artist, try to show the different sides. So in that way, you're more like a journalist. You have different voices coming, even the ones that you're not convinced about. So if you work on climate, and you also, in whatever you're producing, are representing the view of a climate change denier, and then you are just trying to show what is happening and the different. But if you choose to just use your own opinion and give the voice to the people that you agree with, then that would be that's when it would be activism. So that's how I've come to look at it. I thought I'd contribute after hours and hours of these conversations.
Thank you, for these thoughts. I wonder whether I should do my little philosophical disagreement about the definition of objectivity. But you could think of it in stage gates, right? You could say, okay, you have a subjective choice of a career, and then once you have made this choice, you buy into the standard of not privileging your vision of things as far as you can, but rather than abiding by kind of laws of science standard and not making up data and believing the statistical tools and all these kind of things that then you might want to call objective, which is problematic for philosophical reasons, but would be closer to objectivity than, say, being an artist and focusing on the part of the story that you care about. But some detail maybe.
for me, it's also not so important like to find a definition for what's an artist, what's a scientist, what's a journalist, what's an activist. I think all these are very valuable jobs, and it's very important that we have people doing their work in these areas, and I think we see that these definitions are already starting to merge, right? We have scientists for future, right? I mean, this is clearly a combination of activism and of science work. I mean, of course, there's also not only the neutral kind of trying to be neutral journalism we find maybe if we check daily newspapers, but there's also radical leftist newspapers who really have which is an opinion journalism, right? And I'm very addicted to reading this, and I enjoy it a lot, and I learn a lot from it. And of course, all these things exist, right? So, but I would make a plaidoyer for not keeping these different groups separated from each other, but I think we could all learn a lot from merging these boundaries, and yeah.
So it's more the politics that would define the commonality than what tools you use for your work in a certain sense.
I mean, society defines all the time, right? My insurance company defines that I'm an artist and not a journalist and not an activist and not a scientist or whatever, and it might be the same for other people.
I have another question. We talked briefly about your development as an artist and moving from painting to the work you were then doing. How do you see the role of art schools? Are they doing their job of preparing students to making art in a world that's burning? And if not, what should they do differently?
That's a very difficult question, because there are so many art schools, and I think some do really...
Let's take the Angewandte as an example. No, I don't know where you went.
Some do really, I think, a perfect jobs, and others, they still stood somehow in the 19th century, at least ideologically, sorry. I mean...
What should they be doing if they want to be in the 21st century?
I mean, we're living in a time where it's really upon us in this decade, to define whether I think there will be a society that's livable on this planet in the future. And therefore, I think all institutions globally should really put this in the center of their institutions in order to make it possible that our kids and the kids of our kids will have an atmosphere to breathe in, and water to drink in, and to have enough food that can be grown. And at the moment, the society is pretty bleak. And you were talking already about doom, which is probably the predominant way of how our future is being drawn, also in the media, also in art, in cinema. And even though I know, I mean, because I analyze all these things, that this is the most likely scenario that we will not make it as humanity. I do everything which is in my power, and I commit my entire life and my entire work to those actors I consider the strongest, to support their struggle through my work. Because, I think there's, even in the bleakest scenario, there's no possibility to give up. You still have to continue to fight. At least I need it in order to look in the mirror when I get up in the morning. And it should be for every one of us, I think. Because even though we have all these differences in where we stand politically, what we eat, how we live, what we should all have in common is this common wish to survive. But if we just look at the activities all of us do and that will be accumulated, our activities lead towards an extermination. So what should art schools do? I mean, I was invited sometimes to be in hearings and when I was applying to become a professor, and I was usually very outspoken about what I would do, and maybe that was also a reason why I never got a job. But
you can tell us.
But I mean, my idea was always that this is such a privilege to work with a younger generation of very educated people coming from different backgrounds, and to spend a few years together in a space where everyone can learn from each other. And I think that you can really try to manage something together. I also have a curatorial practice, and I did a cycle of a few shows where I focused on the climate movement, and I showed, for example, 12 or 15 different artists who all have a different approach to how to be part of the climate justice movement as an artist. There's a multiplicity of different methods, how to connect to the movement, how to be active in the movement, how to become part of it, and how to contribute somehow to the struggle. And of course, what I would want to do, and what I would suggest that more people would do, is to kind of educate about the possibility we as artists can have to change the world, to be part of movements, of activism, of political strategies. And I think that these movements can also become stronger through our participation. And I think this is necessary, which would again lead towards this dissolving the borders between artist and activist, because that would be the program of what I wish, what would happen in art school.
Is there a question? Yeah, please. Remark.
As you said before, the question is, finally, whatever you do at universities, you have the ones who fight for or against climate or pollution and all the things, but you also have the right-wing people at universities. So definitely I say, I do not know exactly where the people are left-wing, right-wing, but you have a lot of these people and those people, and the question is, at universities always, what do people learn to look behind the scenes, what they are taught, to think critically? And that's the only goal for me at universities, at every teaching institution.
Yes, but all this critical knowledge will not help in order to stop climate breakdown or the biodiversity crisis or the...
It's not the only problem in this world. Sorry for saying that.
Yeah, so choosing one's problem, well, it's not the only problem in the world.
It's true.
It's true. So how do you... If you had to give, on the other side now we were talking about what art schools should do, but if you were to give advice to someone who is studying art right now, is preoccupied with the state of the world, what can they do? How do they choose their combat if, there are also different combats, of course, in the world? Or is it climate change? I mean, it's also okay if you say there's one combat that matters more than the others.
I think we have meaningful combats all around the world, right? I mean, just like in the past few weeks, we had uprisings in the Philippines, in Madagascar, in Peru, in Serbia. I'm missing at least 5, I would say. But, sorry? In the US. Right, but that was more a demonstration, not an uprising, I think. Morocco tried one, failed so far. So I think, I mean, all these struggles are also kind of connected, because in all these regimes, and probably it applies to the vast majority of all governments in the world, we have quite corrupt entities in power, and these are also the entities which have very close connection to capital, and the most influential and most valuable capital is probably still fossil capital, right? In the year 2024, we had the largest profits ever gained by any corporations in the world by the petroleum corporations. So that also means that the most destructive form of producing or of producing something is also the most profitable one, and these two things are of course linked together to each other. I mean, we are living in a time where we have all the technologies, and in general, if we would kind of try to define a living world from the get-go, it would be possible to design this world with renewable energy. But we all know that there's also the largest investments also in this year and in last year in fossil fuels, just because this is still so profitable, right? And this link has to be broken, right? I mean, it must just be banned, right, on a global level.
There's a remarkable question.
I'm Klaus's student at the Anima. I just got here actually from the Systeme meeting. So thank you for these questions, I really appreciate it. But my question was actually about the global struggle and the human rights. Because I was wondering if you can think of any campaigns that use creativity or arts in non-disciplinary sense that have really impacted you, or you can think of in the past years that were actually quite successful.
So can you think of campaigns, just for the audience who's listening online,
yeah,
that
I
has
mean,
impacted you?
Historically, so when I was a student myself, and when I tried to find out as much as possible about different ways of how politics and art are connected, I was very impressed by this anti-AIDS activism, primarily in New York. So there was Grand Fury, for example, and all these ACT UP activities. So they developed a very clear, very strong visual language. The images, the text, they were used in public campaigns. But I think due to the involvement of activists, this became really something that beyond without this participation, and it was also very successful, I think.
These were artistic kind of
yes.
power artistic strategies.
Yes. Grand Fury is an artistic group. Recently, I could give so many examples, and it's more the problem of choice than I don't know. There is, for example, there are these silver inflatables in the climate movements, by the activist collective, artist activist collective Tools for Action. A central person in it and the founder of it is Bambi van Baalen, previously Arthur van Baalen. And these are silver balls. They are 3 by 3 by 3 meters. And usually they are being used in a quite playful manner in demonstrations. So like a water ball, they are thrown up the air and people play with them. And media loved this, at least at the beginning when they were very new, because this created a new category of image. And so it was continuously reproduced in media. But there's another function of this, because in the case that there's a confrontation with the police, these inflatables can be put between the attacking police, so it can protect our bodies. And those of us who are a bit educated in art history know that this is also not the only one that silver inflatables have been used. 3 or 4 years ago, there was a retrospective of Andy Warhol in the MUMOC, and it focused primarily on films, but in addition, they showed also the silver pillows by Warhol. And the interesting thing, and this work directly refers to this, because Andy Warhol took the silver pillow from the gay nightclub in New York City and put it in the art world. And Tools for Action, now symbolically speaking, take the silver pillow from the art institution and take it back in public space and use it as the name of their collective already suggests, use it as a tool for action. And I think that's a brilliant work with different levels and a real function as well.
Maybe a last round of questions before I think we wrap it up. If there's any on your part. I don't know if someone tracking, if online people write something. Is there? Ja, genau, du hast ein Mikrofon.
Just going back to the very beginning, in Spitzbergen, where you were, you mentioned that there were 2,000 people who lived there.
Yeah, right? There's one city, Longyearbyen, and in this city 2,000 people live.
Yeah, and so there it's like 8 degrees warming. So what do they say? Because I would be really interested to hear their voice, and I've never heard a voice of people from these areas that are most affected. So.
Svalbard is a very special location, also because I think it's one of the few areas on the globe, Antarctica is another one, where there's no indigenous population. There was never any indigenous population, just because it's too cold and there's no possibility to grow anything. Also, nowadays, I think they experiment a bit with greenhouses where they grow tomatoes, but more or less everything you can buy in the supermarket is being imported from mainland Norway, which is, of course, it's like a 2-hour flight, right? From Oslo, even 3-hour flight. To Svalbard. Svalbard is far away from Oslo than Vienna. That shows you also how far away it is. Therefore, there's an international population. The language in which people communicate there is English. There's lots of Russians, but there's also an Asian population. They have a university, they have an airport, and they have a harbor, the only university. And there are only streets in this one city, in Longyearbyen. There are no streets in the rest of the island. So if you want to go there, you have actually to go by ship. But as there is no harbors, you go with these orange Zodiacs, So the main ship stays somewhere, and then you go with the small zodiacs to the harbor. And there's many polar bear there, so you cannot go there alone. You have always be accompanied by someone who is trained and permitted to wear a weapon there. But there's no native population you could ask. The average duration of people who stay there is, I think, 2 years. And many people stay just like for one season, for 6 months or so, because then it's 6 months completely dark. And then also many people leave because it's hard to do it emotionally, half a year without sun, if you are not used to it. Yeah.
Mm. Did you get a chance somewhere else to talk to populations that were more affected by climate change than we are, and kind of, or do you know other artists who give a voice to them, to kind of follow up on Gloria's question?
Yeah, I mean, there is also artists with an indigenous background, for example, who commit their work giving voice to affected populations, for example, from the Sami in Scandinavia. And there's Jenny Latte, for example. She's an amazing artist who does a lot on climate breakdown in the region where she and her people are living.
I'm sure you could give us a great list of people to look at. Is there a publication for the curation you did on the, or could you share something on other strategies?
There's we only did a handout. The entire exhibition will travel to Leeds in the next year. There's a space in the Leeds Art University. They commit their budget to show that art has a function in climate activism, and we plan to do a publication on that occasion. But so far, there's, I think, a PDF on my webpage you can download for free.
Fantastic.
This project is titled Overground Resistance, so just that you find it.
Good. I think it remains to thank you so much for joining us tonight. I found it super insightful, took many notes, hope we can follow up on it each in our personal way, and for those who are part of the seminar, we all together. I want to also invite you to come again on the beginning of December, I think the 1st even, it's a Monday, the 1st Monday in December, where Gloria Benedict will have a conversation with me around her work. She comes more from the stage arts, performing arts, and has developed quite a body of work also in research on these topics, so please join me again. And for those who are curious about how to live and succeed like an artist, on the 19th of November there's a little event at the Angewandte on that topic in Flug 1 with readings by the people who were part of the seminar last year, some works on the question, perhaps a bit of a workshop as well, and a book presentation on this anti-manual, as we called it, how to live and succeed like an artist, which kind of goes deeper into some of the questions. Thank you, and we who are here, we can still stay a little bit. There's a bar, they have some toasts, and maybe you can ask questions you didn't dare to ask in the public to Oliver, if you also have a moment to stay. Thanks again. And see you next time.
Thank you.